Her Smoke Rose Up Forever is a collection of science fiction and weird stories by James Tiptree Jr., released in 2014 by Orion as part of its SF Masterworks series. James Tiptree Jr. was born in Chicago in 1915 and began publishing science fiction in 1967 after completing a doctorate in psychology and concluding that what was then called pulp fiction would probably be perceived as incompatible with a respectable academic career. Over the next decade, Tiptree gained a loyal readership, corresponding with fellow science fiction writers such as Ursula Le Guin, as well as with ordinary admirers. Nevertheless, as the critic John Clute tells us, before 1977, all we knew of James Tiptree Jr. was that he was no longer young, because he told us he was middle-aged. He also claimed to be Chicago-born, often abroad in his youth, involved in intelligence work in World War II, and postal evidence suggested that he lived somewhere near Washington, D.C. Obviously, speculation grew, and some of the author's followers began playing detective. In 1976, Tiptree mentioned in a letter that his mother had recently died in Chicago. When the few details were used to locate the obituary, it became clear that the deceased parent must be the explorer Mary Hastings Bradley, which in turn meant that James Tiptree Jr. could only be one person, a 61-year-old woman called Alice B. Sheldon. Speculation that she might be a woman had arisen before, but several prominent writers had dismissed it. In her letters, she'd always signed herself Tip. As she later wrote to Ursula Le Guin, "I never wrote you anything but the exact truth, and there was no intent to deceive." She continued to write under the pseudonym James Tiptree Jr. until her death in 1987. The name Tiptree was apparently taken from a brand of marmalade. It's easy to deride those writers who insisted that Tiptree must be male, but it raises questions about how far all of us consider fiction as gendered. Could we imagine Ernest Hemingway and Jack Kerouac as women, or Charlotte Bronte and Colleen Hoover as men? Would it make any difference to us if it was suddenly revealed, ignoring for a moment the overwhelming improbability of such a thing, that that's what they were? Why do we want our writers to have names, biographies, and accompanying photos? How does it affect us? I'll leave you to consider those questions. The stories in this collection are varied, and some of them have become classics. In Houston, Houston, do you read? A trio of all-male astronauts circumnavigates the sun at the end of the last century. Conditions aboard the spaceship are basic and boredom is unrelenting. On the return journey, there's a glitch in the space-time continuum, and when they contact Houston, they've traveled 300 years into the future. The world is now ruled entirely by women, the male half of the species having died out in a plague, and it's become an egalitarian paradise. The three men aren't entirely happy to hear that. In The Women Men Don't See, two men and two women take a private plane to Mexico, but a storm hits, and they're forced to crash land in a remote mangrove swamp. They survive, but the male protagonist is continually tempted by rape. Hideous aliens haunt the swamp, and when they finally break cover, the women beg to be taken back to their home planet. How could a woman choose to live among unknown monsters? The frustrated protagonist muses at the end. Not all of the stories are as overtly feminist as these two, but they all say something interesting and important about the human condition. Many of them concern death. Although James Tiptree Jr. was inducted into the Science Fiction and Fantasy Hall of Fame in 2012 for reasons to do with her own death, she's become a divisive figure. The James Tiptree Jr. Award, founded in 1991, was renamed the Otherwise Award in 2019 after its administrators reluctantly decided that it couldn't continue under its existing name. There are certain words and themes social media gets unreasonably jumpy about. Rather than risk having this video taken down, I'll leave you to discover why she's become controversial. It probably won't be difficult.